coffee gotten too fancy? Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and welcome guests. On the second floor kitchenette of my office, the answer is spelled out, bold in Sharpie. Yes. It comes at no surprise to me as someone who refuses to acknowledge the different sizes of coffees at Starbucks. Venti Grande? But as there are people who prefer a particular vintage of wine, or a person who prefers a strongly hopped beer, there are people who are great critics of coffee. There are a lot of local roasters who are importing coffee beans from abroad and roasting them in their backyards. But coffee doesn't have to be fancy. I find a simpler pleasure in coffee. There's something about the taste, the caffeine, and the ritual of making coffee in the morning that I can't quite seem to shake off. My favorite mornings are the ones where I can sit in front of my computer, browsing Reddit, and all the memes with a favorite mug in my hand. And my least favorite evenings are the ones where I've had maybe a cup too many and a strict deadline ahead of me. In my college days, I remember the counter with the pot of coffee that had been made by someone who had maybe too much on their plates. And eventually, that person became me. But if you've never made something before, and you're like me, making that first pot of coffee can be pretty difficult. Even with a friend over my shoulder to teach me the ropes, it came out tasting more like coffee-flavored water. And so today I want to help inspire some confidence to make a consistent cup of coffee. So in my office, there are a variety of different ways to make coffee. You could pop a pod into the Keurig machine. You can try your hand as a barista at the downstairs espresso machine. And finally, you can use this device, an AeroPress. While this may look fancy, it makes coffee that is very consistent. I got this as a gift from my parents many years ago, and it kind of works like an espresso machine. For those not familiar with espresso, it's made by putting nearly boiling water through finely ground coffee beans with pressure. So, how do you make coffee with this AeroPress? Well, like any good child, you read the instructions. So, the first step is to take this filter. Take this filter, put it at the bottom so the grinds don't fall out. Screw it in. Then you take some finely ground coffee and you put it in. Then you boil some water. You let it boil until 195 degrees. You pour it in up until this two line. Then you stir for 10 seconds. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 10. Then you take the top and you squeeze this until all the liquid comes out. And you can see that this thing is kind of old because I'm having a pretty difficult time squeezing. And at the end, you get a thick, strong coffee that's kind of like espresso, but not quite espresso. So I fill it up to the top to get what you would call an Americano. So bon appetit. It's sour. And the first 5 or so cups of coffee I made with the AeroPress came out sour. So if you're making coffee for the first time and your coffee comes out too weak, bitter, sour, or some other strange variety of wrong, the first thing you should do is go to Google and search up what's ailing you. So in my case, sour coffee is the result of under-extracted coffee. And under-extracted coffee can happen in 3 ways. First, the grinds can be too coarse or too fine. The water can be too hot or too cold. And the brew time can be too short or too long. So, which one of these was it? Well, thinking back, I know the water temperature was probably okay. Usually I let the water heat up, it goes off, and then I wait a couple seconds for it to settle down. And that usually leads to water that's hot enough. It's probably not the brew time because I use a very scientific method of counting Mississippis. And so I found out that my sour coffee was the result of using regular coffee grinds that you would find out of like a full Werther's can. You actually need an espresso grind for the AeroPress. And so let's make it again. First, we put on a filter, then we take our espresso grind, put it in, we fill it up with hot water, we stir for 10 seconds, we compress for 30 to 45 seconds, and then fill it up to water, drink, and it turned out okay. And that's all there is to it. I've probably made 100 cups of coffee with this coffee maker. And out of those 100, maybe 5 or 10 of those came out not so great. But it's a process of actually doing. When you see a recipe or some sort of instructions, you should really just go through it, observe the process, and if the result doesn't come out the way that you expected, then try it again. But don't do it the same way every time. So, in conclusion, I really enjoy a consistent cup of coffee. It doesn't have to be fancy. And I hope after hearing me talk, you'll be able to brew one too. Thank you.